We've recently made some changes to our lighting system, and this video is just going to have a brief overview of what those changes are, and also actually what those changes aren't. So I'm gonna start with that and what hasn't changed. So the bulk of the system has not changed. So for example, the lights, all of the wiring, the track, things like jumps, signal boosters, and all the miscellaneous small things like split loom, wire clips, splicing connectors. All of that has not changed at all. So essentially, the main thing that has changed is the control box, and as a result of one of those changes, we also have changed out the areas that connect the DC power to the lighting system. So specifically, that is the power taps have been changed out for a regulator, and then we now have a specific starter part that's going to be used instead of just a male connector at the beginning. So let's dive into some of the specifics of the changes. So the big one is essentially we have switched from a 5-volt power supply to a 12-volt power supply. So here on my left, this is the old control box, and then these are two versions of the new control box. There's a single power supply version and a dual power supply version. The old one, the power supply was running at 5 volts, and this was good in some ways because it connected directly to the lights. But with 5 volts, voltage drop is an issue that is ever present, and something that requires a lot of planning and wiring to make sure that it doesn't happen and doesn't show up on systems. Switching to a 12-volt system has, I'm not going to say completely eliminated that problem, but it's made it way easier, and has made system design a little bit easier in that sense of just getting power to your lights and not having to worry about voltage drop as much. Another big change that came along with the power supply change is we switched to a class 2 power supply. This is a big one, especially for our dealers that are not electricians. Class 2 systems are essentially deemed inherently safe. They're determined to not be an electrical shock or fire hazard by definition. So any power supply that's certified to Class 2 is essentially determined to be safe. And the big upside to that is we can use wiring that is less expensive, less big, like the sheathing is less big, so it's easier to run and less expensive. And there aren't any electrical certifications required, so there's no inspection or permitting needed to install a Class 2 system. The other change that we've made with the electrical portion of the control boxes is that we now include the power cable as part of the assembly, which makes installation faster and improves safety as well, because now all of the AC components are actually contained within this junction box. So there's no way that anybody could touch anything that's live, which again improves the safety of the system. I'll move these aside and we'll take a look at a couple of the smaller items that have changed. So because we have switched to a 12 volt, we've added 3 new parts. Here they are. Let me just lay them out. So they are these. Many of you will be familiar with this part here. This is a power tap. We've discontinued the power tap and won't be using them anymore. They're being replaced with this part. It's a regulator. You'll notice that they're very similar in how they're put together, and they actually connect into the system exactly the same. Before, these 2 leads on the power tap would connect into the power wire that's coming in from the power supply, and then this would connect to 2 light strings, and the 5 volts coming in would just feed directly into the lights. On the new one, it's slightly different because we're feeding in 12 volts on the power line, and then this regulator drops it down to 5 volts, which then feeds the lights. So it's essentially, it's a direct replacement, but it does perform another function in that it has regulation inside it, so we can drop voltage from 12 to 5 volts. The starter is also performing essentially the same function, but this part is designed to work at the start of each light string. So there would be an 18-3 wire that would essentially look something like this, coming from the control box, and for each data output there would be this wire, and on the old system it would be ground, data, and 5 volts. But as we've switched to the 12 volt power supply, this is now ground, data, and 12 volts. So when these connect into the starter connector now, this also has a regulator in it, which will send 5 volts out to the lights. And it also has some protection circuitry for the data line coming in as well. The third new part is a isolator, and it looks pretty much the same as the other ones, except this is for isolating power zones from each other. So if there was a power supply powering lights on this side of it, and then a different power supply applying lights over here, say for example this is coming from the control box, but this is an auxiliary power supply that's powering the lights off to this side, what the isolator does is it allows data to pass through so you can keep your data line going, but it isolates the 2 power zones from each other so that they don't touch. And this is something that comes with the class 2 power supply, is that they shouldn't touch each other, because if you connect 2 class 2 power supplies together, they could potentially provide more power than the maximum rating for a class 2 system, and then it wouldn't be class 2 anymore, and it wouldn't be considered inherently safe. So it's important that anytime you have 2 power zones coming in contact with each other, we put in an isolator that keeps them separated. Other than that, that's pretty much the changes in the system. Installation wise, pretty much everything happens the same. There's no real change there, other than using a regulator instead of a power tap, and installing the new control box versus the older control box. Everything else installs pretty much the same. Price wise, everything will be pretty much a wash. It might move a couple dollars, but essentially it's not going to affect pricing really at all. And then the only thing now, before when you quote a job and you're doing the site visit, one thing you need to check for is the length of power wire you're going to need. These come in multiple different lengths. So during the site visit, determine where your control box is going to go, and then order a power wire that's appropriate for the distance to the outlet that you're going to be running. Otherwise, essentially no real changes to the procedures or installation method, and parts ordering will still work the same as well. So hopefully that gives you a good summary of the changes, and we have a whole bunch of other videos that will go more in depth for each of the parts and the scenarios and things like that. But this video will hopefully give you a good overview of the big picture of what the changes are.